Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ambrose, and today we're going to be taking a look at Carter Burwell's score for True Grit. Today's lesson is going to be in two parts. First, I'm going to give you some overall background about the film, and number two, we're going to dive into a MIDI mockup that I put together and look at the musical aspects of it. True Grit is a 2010 film by Joel and Ethan Coen, starring Jeff Bridges, Haley Steinfeld, Matt Damon, Barry Pepper, and Josh Brolin. The score was written, orchestrated, and conducted by Carter Burwell. True Grit is based on the book by Charles Portis, and there is a movie adaptation from 1969 starring John Wayne and Kim Darby. Carter Burwell, a two-time Oscar nominee, has scored such productions as Raising Arizona, The Big Lebowski, No Country for Old Men, and Netflix's Space Force. Burwell has scored every Coen Brothers movie dating back as far as 1984, a total of 15 movies or so. Burwell began his film scoring career with the Coen Brothers' breakout release, Blood Simple. Burwell was working as an animator and gigging musician at the time. Burwell connected with the Coen brothers through a network of colleagues, composing the score with a limited budget and scarce resources. True Grit is the story of a young woman seeking to arrest and bring to justice the man who killed her father, Tom Chaney. Traversing the wilds with the help of the U.S. Marshal, Rooster Cogburn, and Texas Ranger LaBeef, Mattie Ross seeks to deliver divine justice by making Tom Chaney face trial for his crimes. Mattie's sense of justice is guided by her Presbyterian doctrines, a theme prominent throughout. She believes she is delivering God's justice upon the wicked. Mattie's faith is the through line connecting the music to the action and adventure on screen. And I'm sorry, if you are not familiar with this movie in general, it's a pretty classic Western tale. As the film was conceived, Carter Burwell and the Coen brothers agreed that 19th century Lutheran church hymns should be the backbone of the music. After deliberation, they decided upon the following hymns: Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, The Glory Land Way, Hold to God's Unchanging Hand, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Talk About Suffering. On his website, Burwell states, "The book is narrated by Mattie, and you never forget her church background because it's present in her voice on every page. She doesn't narrate the body of the film, however, and I came to think that a score based on church music would put her quest in context and make her unbelievable story believable." The score features primarily piano, clarinet, and full orchestra. The pieces often reference the aforementioned hymns. The score is not overly loud, boisterous, or overbearing, again to quote Burwell. Solo piano suggested the church. Clarinet had a cool plaintive quality that matched the look of the picture, and the orchestra allowed the scale of the story to expand as Mattie moved away from civilization into the wilderness. The picture was wrapped, the score fully produced, when Burwell sat down to write the liner notes for the album release. Upon completion, Burwell had a rude awakening from the higher-ups at Paramount Pictures. The company took issue with the fact that Burwell's score was based on pre-existing themes. Burwell states, "I got a surprising response from Paramount Pictures. They wanted me to remove any reference to the hymns. They had many reasons. They didn't want the descendants of the hymns authors to come looking for money, despite the fact that these compositions are in the public domain. They didn't want the Academy Awards music branch to disallow the score because of its use of pre-existing themes. And they didn't want to dilute their ownership as publishers of the score." Burwell, unwilling to remove reference to the original composers in the liner notes, insisting on delivering due credit to Anthony Showalter, J.S. Torbett, Franklin Island, and Charles Converse. on giving due credit to artists, Burwell states. I don't want to be part of this tradition to the extent that I can avoid it. So I insisted. In the end, Paramount and I fought over one word in the liner notes. Was the score based on these hymns? Influenced by them? In the end, we decided they were rooted in them. The last controversy was whether or not the score would be eligible for an Oscar. Quote, indeed, Paramount was correct. The Music Branch Executive Committee did deem the score to True Grit ineligible because of its reliance on pre-existing themes. Okay, I wanted to basically tell you that to tell you this. What I'm about to show you is not exactly the most groundbreaking piece of orchestral work, in the literature. But this background and the context of being tied to the Lutheran tradition makes it much more interesting and much more impactful when we analyze it in the film itself.
If you don't turn around and take me across, you may find yourself in court where you don't want to be. I have a good lawyer.
Hey!
Let's go, little Blackie. Come on.
That is quite a horse.
In this section of the video, we're going to break down a MIDI mock-up that I put together of the cue river crossing from the film True Grit by Carter Burwell. I'm going to break the piece down into two sections. In the first section, let's take a look at this chord progression. It's in the key of G major. It's diatonic. It doesn't stray out of the key. And it's a very simple chord progression because it would be based off of the church hymns that this music is based on. Underneath this chord progression, there is an ostinato. This is a triplet figure in the cello and possibly the viola. And if you are unaware, an ostinato just means a repeated pattern. And it's a root, a fifth, and an octave. It looks like this. In this rendition, I also have the bass and the harp holding down the tonic. This rhythmic motif carries throughout the duration of the piece, at least in the original recording. Now we're going to take a look at our violin melody. Again, very basic. I think the best way to classify this section is motif 1 and motif 2. I don't believe you want to call them separate themes because there's not enough development within each of them to really call them different themes. First, listen for the first motif in the violins, and then listen for the second motif as the trumpet enters. Composers of the 18th and 19th century often used the French horn to evoke a sense of nature. For instance, in Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. This is because the French horn originated as a hunting horn. So I think this orchestrational choice by Carter Burwell is meant to evoke a sense of nature. And then here, the horn is just outlining the chord G, then B, then D. That's to give a sense of motion, but not actually change the chord. And then here, we add a solo trumpet, which has Old West connotations. Something like a bugle call, something you might see in a cowboy movie. So these subtle orchestration colors that he chooses really lay a nice tone palette for this film. In my mock-up of the piece, I decided to expand the ending and add a little bit of that epic flair to it. So I added the percussion, ramped up, and it sounds like this, and then we'll come back and I'll break that down a little bit further. The first thing I want to draw your attention to in this section is this modulation point. So I just took the first motif, made it quote-unquote epic, repeated the entire section, but then transposed it up a fourth. So when it sounds like it's going to resolve, it's actually modulating to a new key. Which A, adds a layer of interest, and B, adds a sense of elevation because we have gone up a perfect fourth, meaning we have played the exact same notes, but now they are 4 notes higher. And remember, I mentioned this connection of the fourth because of its relation to the plagal cadence, the traditional Amen cadence that you hear in church hymns. And in this case, it just happened to work out really well that it was a nice key to modulate to. Then I toyed around with the melody a little bit, boosting it in the trumpet and then the French horn. I want to draw your attention to this trumpet part. As the trumpet passes the melody over to the French horn, the trumpet then takes on a rhythmic driving pattern, which sounds like this. This is very typical brass writing used to punctuate rhythmic accentuation points. When you are working in the DAW, working in MIDI, I think it's important to remember how these players would perform this music. A great example is this figure right here would be what we call double tonguing. Instead of ta-ta-ta, it's ta-ka-ta, ta-ka-ta, ta-ka-ta-ta-ka-ta-ta. So you can get a much cleaner, quicker bite to these rhythmic figures. So that's just something to keep in mind, generally speaking, as you're working with MIDI. If you want to bring it to life, try to think of how people would actually perform this stuff. Even if you don't have the intention of having it being performed, it's good to be in the mindset. This part was a struggle for me because I wanted that triplet motion to be carried through, but I couldn't find just the right spot to make it so. Until I found this interplay between the trumpet and the viola. This way, I'm able to fill up a register that is not as dense at the moment, meaning the low end is filled up with your bass, your cello, your tuba. My high-end frequencies are filled with the violin and the piccolo. So I have this mid-register to play with. So I ended up putting the triplet in the viola, but if you'll notice here, there's also a rhythmic interplay between the viola and the trumpet. This way there's almost an alternating kinetic energy between the two that's pushing this triplet driving pattern forwards. If I did not interplay them so well, they would be overlapping in the same register and canceling a lot of each other out. And then the ending lands on the 6th chord, the minor 6, which just happens to be A minor. There's a quick ramp up, and then a climactic ending. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the piece. So just to recap what we covered in this lecture. We talked about the film as a Western. We talked about Maddie's sense of divine justice led by her Presbyterian doctrines. We talked about the string ostinatos, the hymn-like violin melodies, the coloristic and performative traits of brass instruments, primarily the French horn and the trumpet. We also discussed how to expand an ending by changing the instrumentation and through the use of modulation. So I hope you enjoyed my lecture on Carter Burwell's score to True Grit. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one. Take care.